Spring, 1956, on the Warner Brothers backlot. Two men stand next to each other during a break in filming. One is a studio grip, 6 feet tall, and standing next to the other man he suddenly looks like a child. The other man is 6'6", 235 pounds, with a 48-inch chest. In that photograph, the two of them barely look like the same species. This was one of Hollywood's strangest technical headaches during its golden age. What do you actually do with a leading man who is simply too large for the frame? The standard camera setup was never designed for giants, and putting a 6.5-foot man into an ordinary scene could quietly wreck the whole shot. Crews dug literal trenches for actors to stand in. Cinematographers bent their entire angle strategy around one man's shoulders. Whole departments spent their creative energy not on storytelling, but on figuring out how to physically fit certain men onto a movie screen. 9 of them beat that problem completely, all 6'4" or taller, and forced an entire industry to bend around their size instead. Here is what happened to each one of them, the 9 tallest leading men of Hollywood's golden age. Number 1. James Arness, 6'7". The United States Army found a use for James Arness's height that no film studio would ever have thought of first. On January 22, 1944, Allied troops landed at the Anzio beachhead in Italy, and among the very first men off the landing craft was a 20-year-old private from Minneapolis. He had tried enlisting in the Navy earlier and been turned away, since he already stood 6'7", and Navy aircraft cockpits simply were not built for a man of that size. The Army, on the other hand, had a very specific need for him. At Anzio, with the water depth uncertain along the beach, someone had to wade in first to find out how deep it actually was. That job went to Arness, since he was the tallest man available. He went in ahead of everyone else. 10 days after the landing, during a night engagement in a vineyard, he was hit by machine gun fire that shattered his lower leg, and a concussion grenade lifted him bodily off the ground. He survived, endured multiple surgeries, and received an honorable discharge in January 1945. The wound never fully healed, and for the rest of his life, including 2 full decades spent riding horses through the dust of a television western, Arness quietly carried chronic pain in that leg that he rarely mentioned to anyone. He hitchhiked to Hollywood in 1946. His first significant role came in 1951, playing the towering alien creature in Howard Hawks's The Thing from Another World. He was cast almost entirely for his size, given no dialogue, and moved through the sets in a costume that hid his face completely. The film succeeded, and Hawks recommended Arness to John Wayne, who signed him to a personal contract shortly afterward. In 1955, CBS offered Wayne the lead role of Marshal Matt Dillon in a new western called Gunsmoke. Wayne turned it down, feeling too established in film to risk moving to television, but he appeared briefly in the premiere episode's introduction and personally recommended Arness for the part instead. Wayne later called it the easiest recommendation he ever made in his life. Gunsmoke ran for 20 years and 635 episodes, and Arness appeared in every single one of them, playing Matt Dillon as physically immense and morally serious across 5 different decades. He walked into a room and other characters simply seemed to shrink, not through any camera trick, but because Arness produced that effect naturally, without visible effort. By most accounts, he was a genuinely shy man who kept reporters off his sets entirely, and TV Guide once nicknamed him the Greta Garbo of Dodge City. Away from the cameras, he enjoyed poetry, yacht racing, and surfing. He died in June 2011 at 88 years old. Matt Dillon turned out to be the only character he ever really needed. Number 2. Clint Walker, 6'6". He was born Norman Eugene Walker in Hartford, Illinois, in 1927. He left high school at 16 and joined the Merchant Marine at 17. Over the years that followed, he worked cargo ships on the Great Lakes, riverboats on the Mississippi, oil fields in Texas, and a paper mill in the Pacific Northwest. He built his own weights out of poured concrete and trained with them, and by his early 20s, he had a 48-inch chest, a 32-inch waist, and stood 6'6" barefoot. He eventually landed a job working security at a Las Vegas hotel, where several visiting Hollywood figures, including actor Van Johnson, told him his physique alone could build him a career. Walker later said he simply did the math on it, since the pay was better than oilfield work and, as he put it, the bullets on a movie set were fake. He moved to Los Angeles. His first role was an uncredited turn as Tarzan in a Bowery Boys comedy. His second came through director Cecil B. DeMille, who was casting muscular extras for the 10 Commandments. Walker was driving to the studio for his appointment when he pulled over to help a stranded woman change a flat tire, which made him late. DeMille gave him the part anyway. In 1955, Warner Brothers cast him in the very first hour-long western ever produced specifically for television, Cheyenne, where Walker played a wandering post-Civil War drifter raised by Cherokee people after his own parents were killed, a role whose quiet, watchful patience suited Walker's natural stillness almost perfectly. Cheyenne ran for 7 seasons, and the studio regularly used bare-chested scenes to show off his physique, a strategy that required no acting skill at all but reliably drew audiences. In 1958, Walker and the studio reached a standoff over his contract terms. He refused an unfavorable renewal, Warner Brothers suspended him and brought in a replacement, and ratings dropped almost immediately. The studio came back with better terms, and Walker returned to the role. In 1971, he survived a skiing accident at Mammoth Mountain in which a ski pole pierced his chest near the heart. He was briefly pronounced dead before a physician discovered he was still alive, and surgeons repaired the damage. Within 2 months, he was working again. He died in May 2018, 9 days shy of his 91st birthday. Right to the end, he was still the same size he had always been. Number 3. Chuck Connors, 6'5". Kevin Joseph Connors was born in Brooklyn in 1921 to Irish immigrant parents and grew up in Bay Ridge, where his athletic ability became obvious early. By his late teens, his height and coordination had produced a body capable of things most bodies simply could not manage. He played professional basketball for the Boston Celtics and professional baseball for both the Brooklyn Dodgers and the Chicago Cubs, making him one of only a handful of documented athletes in American professional sports history to have played both Major League Baseball and the NBA. During a 1946 warm-up at Boston Garden, he attempted a dunk that brought the backboard down with it, becoming the first player in basketball history to shatter one, entirely by accident. He came to acting almost sideways, through baseball. An MGM casting director spotted him in 1952 and recommended him for a small part in a Spencer Tracy and Katharine Hepburn comedy, just 4 minutes of screen time. To his own apparent surprise, he found he genuinely enjoyed it, and he walked away from professional sports entirely to commit to acting. In 1958, he was offered the lead in a new ABC Western called The Rifleman and initially turned it down, since the offer paid less than his existing freelance work. The producers then took their own children to see him in Old Yeller, where Connors had quietly played a father figure, and came back with a better offer, which he accepted. He played Lucas McCain, a widowed rancher raising his son alone in 1880s New Mexico for 5 seasons. The show's signature moment was an opening sequence in which he spun and fired a modified rifle with a speed that was genuinely his own, since Connors had trained extensively on the weapon and insisted the moves be real. The Rifleman was the first American network series built around a single father raising a child without a mother, and it ran from 1958 to 1963. Its appeal rested on a combination Connors provided almost uniquely: a physical presence large enough to make threat feel credible, paired with an emotional register that made the fatherhood feel genuine, a contrast that a man of ordinary size simply could not have delivered the same way. When Soviet leader Leonid Brezhnev restricted American television from Soviet broadcast, one series was granted an exception: The Rifleman. Reportedly Brezhnev's personal favorite, Connors visited Moscow in December 1973 as the show's official representative. He died in November 1992. His tombstone carries a photograph of him as Lucas McCain alongside the logos of 3 professional sports franchises, 3 separate careers told through a single image. Number 4. Forrest Tucker, 6'5". Forrest Tucker arrived in Hollywood in 1940, carrying a powerful build, a deep baritone voice, and a personal history studios found easier to ignore than to closely examine. He was born in Plainfield, Indiana, in 1919, ran away from home at 17, and worked the carnival and county fair circuit of the Midwest with the easy confidence of a man who understood exactly what he looked like. The Army took him young, and by the time the film industry found him, he had already lived through the improvisational economy of America's margins in ways studio publicity departments were not really built to explain. Columbia signed him, and he was immediately useful as a villain, what the industry simply called a heavy. Directors needed men who could threaten an audience credibly, and Tucker's height let him do that without visible effort. He played villains, then more complicated men, then eventual heroes, cycling through whatever category the industry needed with a pragmatism it clearly respected. He was not a delicate performer, but he had genuine physical command of space and an ease in his own body that translated directly through the camera. When he played comedy, and he often did, he was genuinely funny. When he played menace, he never needed a stunt coordinator to sell it. His most significant work came late in his career. From 1965 to 1967, he played Sergeant Morgan O'Rourke on F Troop, the ABC comedy western, a role that required him to be the calm, still center around which the show's chaos constantly spun. His size, in that comedic context, produced a completely different kind of authority than menace, something closer to stability, both the joke and the straight man at the same time. Tucker died in 1986 after a career spanning nearly 50 years across more than 100 productions. He was rarely the most celebrated man in any given room, but he was consistently, reliably present, a quality the industry made steady use of without always crediting it out loud. Number 5. Rock Hudson, 6'4" to 5". His name at birth was Roy Harold Scherer Jr., and he grew up in Winnetka, Illinois, the only child of a father who abandoned the family during the Depression. His surname became Fitzgerald after his mother remarried. The professional name came later, assembled by an agent named Henry Wilson out of the Rock of Gibraltar and the Hudson River, since Wilson believed a name should announce something larger than the man carrying it. Hudson attended New Trier High School and could not land a single school play role because he struggled to remember his lines. After Navy service in the Philippines, he moved to Los Angeles in 1946, applied unsuccessfully to USC's drama program, and drove a delivery truck while waiting for something to happen. In 1948 he met Wilson, who saw the obvious potential immediately, a man over 6'4" with a face the camera would find easy to love, who genuinely could not act yet at all. Wilson didn't see those two facts as a contradiction. Universal signed him. His first scene, in his first film, Fighter Squadron in 1948, required him to deliver a single line, and it reportedly took 38 takes before that line was usable. What Wilson understood was that Hudson could be taught, since he was disciplined and physically extraordinary, qualities that could substitute for raw natural ability while the real skill developed. Director Douglas Sirk cast Hudson in Magnificent Obsession in 1954 as a reckless playboy who reforms after accidentally blinding a woman he later falls in love with, an emotionally demanding role that Hudson met convincingly, and the film made him a genuine star. Giant, in 1956, earned him his only Academy Award nomination, and in hindsight it remains the role that most precisely captured what he was capable of when the material actually matched him. By 1959 he had pivoted toward romantic comedy, and Pillow Talk with Doris Day generated well over $18 million at the box office. Establishing a comic persona, the studio then deployed across 3 separate Doris Day films within 4 years. From 1959 to 1963, the Hollywood Foreign Press Association named him World Film Favorite 4 consecutive times. Behind that public image, Hudson maintained a private life that would have ended his career instantly if the fan magazines of the era had described it accurately. He was gay, and the industry knew it, quietly containing the information and, at times, benefiting from that containment. In 1955, when a tabloid magazine threatened to publish material about his private life, his agent reportedly negotiated the story away by offering damaging information about 2 other clients instead, a common and troubling practice of studio-era publicity management. Hudson married his agent's secretary, Phyllis Gates, that same year, and the marriage lasted 3 years. In June 1984, a physician discovered a health condition that would eventually be diagnosed as AIDS. Hudson kept that diagnosis private for 14 months. In July 1985, he appeared publicly at an event alongside his old friend Doris Day, visibly thin and diminished, and the footage was broadcast and replayed across the country repeatedly. It was, for a great many Americans, the first time the disease had a face they already recognized. He died on October 2, 1985, at 59 years old, becoming the first major Hollywood star to pass away from AIDS-related complications, a moment that measurably shifted public awareness of the disease at a critical point in the epidemic. If you're enjoying this, go ahead and subscribe to Old Tapes. We dig up the real stories behind the golden age every single week. Number 6. Jeff Chandler, 6'4". Ira Grossel was born in Brooklyn in 1918, the son of Jewish immigrants from Eastern Europe, and he grew up in a household where financial hardship arrived early and never fully lifted. He worked in radio before changing his name to Jeff Chandler on the advice of an agent who felt his birth name communicated nothing useful to the audience he needed to reach. He moved to Hollywood standing 6'4", with one very specific physical trait that studio publicity teams found irresistible. His hair had gone prematurely silver. By his early 30s, he had the physique of a young man paired with the hair color of a patriarch. Universal Pictures, who signed him in the late 1940s, understood exactly how to use that contrast, casting him repeatedly as men older than his actual years, as authority figures, as characters carrying real weight and consequence. The silver hair told an audience what to think about him before he ever spoke a line. His breakthrough came in 1950 with Broken Arrow, a Western directed by Delmer Daves, in which Chandler played an Apache chief opposite James Stewart, casting that was very much a product of its era and would not be repeated by a studio today, but the performance itself earned him an Academy Award nomination for Best Supporting Actor at just 32 years old. In what was still his first major film role, Universal used him constantly through the 1950s in westerns, adventure films, and war pictures, drawn to his commanding presence and low, unhurried voice that matched the silver hair perfectly. He worked well in material that gave him room to be still, and considerably less well in anything demanding real emotional complexity. The studio made 15 films with him in just 8 years. What Universal never quite acknowledged, and what Chandler himself rarely discussed publicly, was that the range of roles being offered to him was steadily narrowing. The silver hair had created its own category, and he fit that category exactly, without much room for it to grow. In 1961, attempting to demonstrate some actual range in a romantic comedy called Portrait of a Mobster, he received reviews suggesting the attempt hadn't landed, playing a role written for a man closer to 20 while he himself was 33. In April 1961, during surgery for a back condition, a complication arose that he never recovered from. He died in June of that year at just 42 years old, having appeared in 53 films across his career. The Academy Award nomination for Broken Arrow remains the single moment his career genuinely captured the full range of what he was capable of, and the decade that followed became, in hindsight, one built around exploiting an image rather than developing the actor underneath it. Number 7. Randolph Scott, 6'4". George Randolph Scott was born in January 1898 in Orange, Virginia, into a family whose manners had survived the Civil War and its aftermath largely intact. He attended Georgia Tech and the University of North Carolina, then moved to Los Angeles, and worked his way into film through physical presence, genuine horsemanship, and an introduction to Howard Hughes that opened his first real doors. Standing 6'4", the industry initially used him in romantic leading roles, and for a period he shared a home with actor Cary Grant, a detail fan magazines of the era mentioned with a vagueness nobody at the studio ever made explicit. He appeared opposite Irene Dunne, Barbara Stanwyck, and Marlene Dietrich, carrying a natural ease on camera that suggested the man and whatever role he played shared the same underlying patience. By the mid-1940s, Scott had found his true form in the Western genre. He wasn't the only tall man working that genre at the time, but he was arguably the most precise. Where Wayne brought scale and forward momentum to a scene, Scott brought stillness. Where Walker brought physical spectacle, Scott brought economy. The violence in his films, when it finally arrived, was earned by everything the stillness beforehand had built, since a large man at rest reads as more genuinely threatening than a large man already in motion, whose next move an audience can already anticipate. In 1962, he made his final film, Ride the High Country, directed by Sam Peckinpah, playing an aging lawman escorting a gold shipment alongside Joel McCrea's equally aging partner with a very different moral compass. The film cost under $900,000 to make. Critics who had spent 3 decades watching Scott play variations of the same steady character finally understood what those decades had quietly been building toward. A film about men who had outlived their own era and knew it, played by a man who seemed to have been rehearsing the part for 40 years. He retired immediately afterward and never made another film. He died in March 1987 at 89 years old, one of the wealthiest actors Hollywood had ever produced. He made the camera come to him, and for 6 full decades, it obliged. Number 8. John Wayne, 6'3". There is one specific detail that complicates the mythology surrounding John Wayne, and it deserves stating plainly. He wore lifts, not in every production, and the precise extent is genuinely contested and probably impossible to resolve fully, but it is documented across enough independent accounts, from co-stars and from wardrobe personnel who worked directly on his films, to be treated as reliable rather than pure rumor. What makes this genuinely interesting isn't what it reveals about Wayne personally, but what it reveals about how the entire Golden Age star system constructed physical image. Wayne was already an unusually tall man to begin with. His World War II-era military paperwork listed him at 6'3", meaning he wasn't inflating a modest height into an impressive one, but stretching an already impressive height into something closer to impossible, because the character audiences knew as John Wayne, built across 2 decades of westerns, demanded a physical scale that even the real John Wayne couldn't always quite deliver on his own. Marion Robert Morrison was born in Winterset, Iowa, in 1907, the son of a druggist. He attended USC on a football scholarship until a boating accident ended his athletic career, leaving him working as a prop man at Fox Studios at 22 years old. Director John Ford noticed him and cast him in a small role, and a decade of low-budget westerns followed. Stagecoach, in 1939, finally made him a star. Wayne went on to become the defining American film hero of his era, through physical charisma, ideological clarity, and an instinctive read on exactly what audiences wanted from a man on horseback. By the industry's own assessment, he wasn't a technically wide-ranging actor, and he said as much himself, describing his own method as reaction rather than performance. But inside the Western and the war film, he had essentially no peer. He walked onto a set and the whole scene seemed to reorganize itself around him, and men who were objectively taller than him still somehow looked smaller standing beside him, a property of the image itself rather than a trick of the camera. He actively sought out tall leading men throughout his career, mentoring Arness personally, and clearly enjoying having Walker on the same studio lot, in a way that suggested both genuine aesthetic appreciation and a competitive undercurrent. He was reportedly uncomfortable around men who exceeded his own scale, without some kind of adjustment, whether that meant lifts, taller hats, or a specially modified wagon with a raised roof built for him, all quiet attempts to manage a physical reality he couldn't fully control on his own. He died in June 1979 from stomach cancer, at 71 years old, having appeared in 179 films across 4 decades. The American Film Institute later ranked him the 13th greatest male star in the history of American cinema. The lifts were reportedly still in his shoes at the very end. He was buried at the height he had always insisted on carrying. Number 9. Raymond Burr, 6'2" to 6'3". Raymond Burr presents a genuine complication for any list built around Hollywood's tallest leading men, and it's worth addressing directly. He stood somewhere between 6'2.5" and 6'3", right at the edge of this conversation rather than clearly and definitively inside it. He belongs here, not because he clears the technical bar with total certainty, but because of what his career reveals about the relationship between raw physical mass and perceived height, and because leaving him out entirely would mean skipping the most deliberate and sustained example of how the studio system used a large man's body to generate genuine emotional response from an audience. Burr was born in New Westminster, British Columbia, in 1917. He carried real physical mass, over 300 pounds at his heaviest, with a face the camera found naturally, almost effortlessly sinister. Those qualities produced a decade of villain roles beginning in the mid-1940s. He played a corrupt district attorney in Pitfall. He played the menacing figure glimpsed across a courtyard in Hitchcock's Rear Window, a character who appeared in barely 12 minutes of a 90-minute film and still left audiences thinking about him on the walk out of the theater. He played the prosecutor who dismantled witnesses in A Place in the Sun. In every one of these roles, Burr projected genuine threat with almost no visible effort. What he understood about his own physicality was straightforward. Mass communicates something different than height does. Height changes the geometry of a shot, occupying vertical space. Mass communicates gravity, making a man seem to require more of the world around him than other men do. More room, more air, more attention. When Burr entered a scene, the room itself seemed to adjust, not its physical geometry, but its atmosphere. In 1957, he was cast as Perry Mason, a criminal defense attorney who was physically imposing and morally absolute, the professional opposite of every corrupt authority figure he'd spent a decade playing. Where the villains had used their scale to intimidate, Mason used his to protect. Perry Mason ran on CBS for 9 years and 271 episodes, and across all 9 seasons, Burr's character famously never lost a single case, a conceit that was never meant to be realistic. It functioned instead as a weekly argument about what the law was actually supposed to be, delivered by a large man who seemed to believe in that argument without a trace of irony. He died in September 1993 and is buried on an orchard property he had maintained for years in Northern California, with no monument visible from the road. Critics remember him for the villains he played in the 1940s and 1950s. Everyone else remembers him for the hero he played for 9 straight years. 9 men, 9 very different paths into the same strange problem, a body simply too large for the standard frame of a movie camera. What connects every one of them is that Hollywood never actually solved that problem cleanly. It just kept adapting around it, one trench, one raised hat, one carefully angled shot at a time, because audiences, it turned out, could not get enough of watching men that large fill up a screen. So here's what I want to know from you. Of everyone on this list, which one do you think used his size the most effectively on screen? And which of these stories genuinely surprised you the most? Tell me in the comments. Subscribe to the channel, and we'll see you in the next one.